Matt Govern, please.
Why does the government feel the need to reclassify cannabis when the overwhelming tide of expert opinion is against it?
This must, I think, be our last question tonight. It's the government's rejection of the advice of an advisory committee who voted by a huge majority not to reclassify cannabis, and the Home Secretary said today it would be reclassified. James Burnell, why does the government feel the need to do this when, in the words of the questioner, the overwhelming tide of expert opinion is against it?
Well, we're doing it to protect people from risk. I mean, there is evidence that it's not the sort of cannabis that people might think of as not very harmful. It's actually a form of cannabis called skunk, which is very, very threatening to people's mental health, and the committee recognised that. And in the last few years, it's gone from being about a third of what is being consumed to about 80%. And we could sort of say, take a wait-and-see approach and see, is it going to cause mental health problems in the future? I think to protect people and to give the right signal, the right thing to do is to be cautious and to say, this is a dangerous drug and we should not be giving a signal in any other direction.
Did this committee and its chairman, Sir Michael Roy, not know all this? Were they ignorant of all these things?
Well, they advise, and we, as a government, have to decide. And the police said that they thought it should be reclassified. We asked parents. They said they thought it should be reclassified. It's a balanced argument. They made 20 other recommendations which we are going to implement. We just disagreed on this one, and it's our duty to make a decision about how to protect people.
Except the chief police officer said it's not going to make any difference to the way they approach these cases, even if it is reclassified. So it doesn't sound as if they're very much in favour of it.
Well, I think, first of all, it's important to have people knowing that this is a dangerous thing because of that change in the strain of it. And secondly, we are going to have an enforcement regime which will, if people are repeat offenders, will make sure that they're charged and that we target things like cannabis farms and dealers and make sure we try and cut off supply.
Go back to the questioner.
Surely if the government takes the committee seriously enough to implement 20 of its 21 recommendations, it should respect the 21st. I mean, that seems very simple and straightforward.
We read what they said, we took it very seriously. They said there was a mental health risk with this form of cannabis, and we thought it was not right to wait and see, that you had to err on the side of caution and protect people.
Min Campbell.
The truth is, this decision was taken long before the committee produced its report. Now, there was a determination to reclassify something which had been reclassified only 4 years ago when David Blunkett was the Home Secretary. And it flies right in the face not only of the committee's recommendation on this particular topic, but also in the face of the evidence.
Why do they want to do it, then?
I think it's the government by headline. I think it's wanting to satisfy a particular constituency of public opinion. That's not what good government should be about. Why establish an independent committee composed of doctors and representatives of the police and representatives of people who counsel those who've suffered from the problem of drug addiction and then refuse to accept their central recommendation, particularly when the incidence of psychosis is actually going down and the incidence of cannabis use is going down as well. So if it's evidence you're looking for, all the evidence points in the other direction.
You agree with that?
I was going to say, why bother reclassifying cannabis when people are breaking into prisons to sell it? And other drugs.
Well, I mean, the first chance Gordon Brown got to prove that he was going to listen, he didn't. As you said, 20 of the 21 recommendations were accepted, and the key one, after all that, was then ignored. So you don't listen, do you? And the reason it's important that you should have listened on this is for the reasons that Ming said. And I'll add another one to that, which is that actually the report further found that there was no evidence that people who take cannabis go on to stronger drugs any more than people who take alcohol and tobacco. So one of those myths has been disproven as well. There's a lot of nonsense talked about cannabis. There are extreme versions of skunk, which I think could have been dealt with separately on this. But the idea that in the space of a few years we've now classified it one way, classified it back the other way, the public have no idea now where the law is on cannabis. I see people walking down the road with spliffs every day in the King's Road, most of them cabinet ministers trying to get over the horrors of their day. But I mean, it's quite obviously not going to be enforceable. And if they do enforce it, all we're going to have is a load of already full-up prisons full of potheads, which is completely pointless.
Yes, sir.
I'm just completely confused by this, because you talk about protecting people. It's about the health risks. But what about alcohol and the adverse effects of that? I mean, I know a lot of people younger than me who are drinking far more than they're smoking any cannabis.
So you ban that as well. Rachel Johnson?
I think Ming's absolutely right. It's the end of dog whistle politics, and it's the beginning of Paul Dacre whistles politics, and I'll come running with a juicy bone for the Daily Mail, isn't it? And this is one of the things that you know, Gordon has wanted to do to try and get some votes in suburban Middle England, I think. And I think it's a terrible mistake to ignore the recommendations of the experts on this. And I think Piers is right. More people are going to end up in prison, and everybody's terribly confused.
The woman there in the middle. Yes, you, madam.
Me?
Yes, you.
Is there any proof at all that reclassification of a drug actually helps prevent use of it, or stops people using it?
Right.
I mean, it's been C and B and C, and I don't think there's been any change.
You will have read a lot of myths on
Heseltine,
this.
please.
Well, there are various aspects of this. I found it totally unacceptable that when the government makes a policy decision that representatives of the police force should say it's not going to make any difference to what they do. I mean, the government is the government, and it is not the police that govern the country. Secondly, I think this has been an appalling cock-up. I mean, to declassify and then to get some evidence and to spend a year reviewing the situation and then to ignore the advice doesn't sound to me like the smack of firm government. Now, if you actually ask my opinion, I actually don't believe, whatever the evidence you produce, I don't believe that there isn't an escalation through one form of drug taking to another. And I think that our attempts as a society to contain and dramatically reduce drug taking are not anything like as effective as they should be, and I think public opinion would like to see far tougher regimes. And if I was Home Secretary, and I'm not and never will be...
It's not too late, Michael.
It is not too late, but we need a Tory government to give it a chance, but the fact is...
too late.
But before... I think that if one really was going to be serious about attacking drugs taking in this country, you would start at the top of society and not the bottom. Because I think that if you were to conduct a test of Britain's public schools, you would find drugs in serious quantities. And it is only if there is an example from the top of society to the smart Chelsea parties and all these things that actually you can go to the public and the guys on the street and say, we're setting an example and you are going to have
I'm sure David Cameron could be particularly helpful on that one.
All right, we have to stop, I'm afraid, there. Our time's up. Did you ever smoke pot? Or?
I've never answered that question. I'm not going to start right in the last 2 minutes of questions.
Go on,
Never answered it.
Say yes.
No, there's no reason why. I didn't see any reason why you should answer it, do you?
You go up 5 points, you know.
Yeah.
Regardless, I think politicians are entitled to private life.
No, it's only in the light of what Michael was saying about starting at the top. Anyway, it's all for question time this week.